Dr. Kim Mina sat alone in her laboratory, aboard the orbital research station, her eyes tired from staring at screens for nearly 18 hours straight. The small office was cluttered with empty coffee cups and food wrappers. For weeks, she had been tracking unusual energy patterns at the edge of known space, and something wasn't adding up. "Computer, run the simulation again," she said, rubbing her temples. The holographic display in front of her lit up, showing the same gravitational anomalies she had been studying for months. The patterns were subtle, tiny fluctuations in the fabric of space-time that most scientists would dismiss as background noise or equipment malfunction. But Kim knew better. She had designed these sensors herself, calibrated them personally. The readings were real, and they were growing stronger. "Lee, come look at this," she called to her assistant, who was dozing in the corner. Li Han yawned and shuffled over, his eyes widening as he saw the latest readings. "That can't be right," he said. "The energy signature is growing at an exponential rate." Kim nodded grimly, "and moving toward populated space at nearly 1/10. Light speed. Whatever this is, it's big, and it's coming our way." 3 days later, Kim stood before the Galactic Concord Council, her heart pounding. The circular chamber was impressive, designed to accommodate 17 different species with vastly different physiologies. Some councillors floated in special gravity wells, others sat in climate-controlled pods, and a few stood on platforms adjusted to their natural height. As she presented her findings, Kim noticed something odd. The usual chatter and translator, static that filled council meetings, had disappeared. Instead, a heavy silence fell over the chamber as her data appeared on the main display. The Zetrian representative, a crystalline being who rarely showed emotion, visibly dimmed its light. The Murian delegates began whistling to each other in their native tongue, forgetting to use their translators. And Ambassador Park Jin, the elderly human representative who had served on the council for decades, grew pale. When Kim finished her presentation, no one spoke for several long moments. She cleared her throat nervously. "The data suggests some kind of spatial anomaly moving through the galaxy. I believe it warrants further investigation." "It is not an anomaly," interrupted Ambassador Park, his voice barely above a whisper. "It is the void." The chamber erupted. Species that normally maintained strict diplomatic protocols were suddenly shouting over one another. Kim stood frozen at the podium, confused by the reaction. Park Jin silenced the room with a gesture. "Doctor, Kim, what you have discovered has been seen before. The void is a cosmic force that appears every 10 millennia. It consumes everything in its path. Planets, stars, even light itself." The Doraxian ambassador, a being with 6 eyes arranged in a circle around its head, projected a historical star map. The last appearance was before humans joined the Concord. 3 entire civilizations were lost. "Lost?" Kim asked. "You mean they evacuated?" The silence that followed answered her question. Kim looked around the room, noticing the alien delegates exchanging knowing glances. Something felt wrong, like walking into a room where everyone had been talking about you. "According to your calculations," said the Quillian representative, its feathers bristling, "the void will reach the outer colonies in approximately 6 months. As the council began discussing evacuation protocols and resource allocation, Kim noticed they were talking about humanity's territory as if it were already lost. None of the species seemed surprised by the news, merely resigned as if they had been preparing for this moment. "Ambassador Park," she whispered as she returned to her seat, "why do I get the feeling they all knew this was coming?" The old man's eyes were sad. "Because, Dr. Kim, in the great game of galactic politics, humans are still the newcomers, and in times of crisis, the youngest are often considered expendable." As Kim left the chamber, the magnitude of what she had discovered settled on her shoulders. Humanity was facing an ancient threat that had destroyed entire civilizations, and their so-called allies were already planning their retreat. Admiral Lee Jun stood at the viewport of Earth's orbital command station, watching the massive Saurian. Warships jumped to faster-than-light travel. The departure left strange ripples in space, like stones thrown into a pond. Just 3 days ago, the Saurian High Command had promised military support against the void. Now their entire fleet was retreating to the far side of the galaxy. "They're running," said Captain Kim, who stood beside him. "The Saurians, the same ones who boast about their warrior code and battle honors." Lee nodded, his face grim. When faced with the void, it seems even warriors know fear. Reports flooded in from across human space. The Medusan Collective, renowned for their advanced technology, had already withdrawn from shared research stations. The Arcturians, Earth's oldest allies, had abandoned their embassy without formal notice. Within 2 weeks of Dr. Kim's discovery, every non-human species in the Galactic Concord had begun emergency evacuation procedures. On Colony World New Horizon, human settlers watched in disbelief as their Quillian neighbors packed up and left. Overnight, the shared farming equipment, the joint water purification systems, all abandoned. 12 years of working side by side, forgotten in an instant. "They didn't even say goodbye," one colonist told reporters. "We thought we were friends." Lee received disturbing footage from the outer colonies, alien ships packed beyond capacity, leaving behind their own people who couldn't fit aboard. On Station Epsilon, hundreds of Doraxian civilians were simply abandoned on the docks, their pleas ignored as the last transports departed. "Their own people," Lee whispered, watching the feeds. "They're leaving their own people behind." The Emergency Earth Summit was called as panic spread through human space. Leaders from every colony and Earth nation gathered, some in person and others via hologram. The debate lasted 18 hours. "The Concord suggests we follow their example," said the UN Secretary, her voice tired. "Abandon outer colonies, consolidate in the Sol system, then retreat along safe corridors they've provided." "Retreat where?" asked the governor of Mars, slamming his fist on the table. "To some empty corner of space while this thing eats our homes?" Lee studied the projections again. Even with every available ship, Earth could evacuate less than 40% of the human population, and that assumed the void maintained its current speed. If it accelerated... "The aliens have faced this before," argued the Chinese premier. "They've survived by retreating. Perhaps we should follow their wisdom." "Wisdom?" the Indian president countered. "Is it wise to abandon billions? Is it wise to run without even trying to fight?" As dawn broke over the summit hall, Lee was called to speak. He had spent the night reviewing Dr. Kim's data and historical records left behind by the fleeing aliens. "The void has come before, yes," he told the silent room. "And each time the elder races ran, they sacrificed outer worlds to buy time for their retreat. But in 10,000 years, not once did they try to stop it." He brought up a new simulation on the main display. "Dr. Kim has identified patterns in the void's movement. Weaknesses. There might be a way to fight this thing, but we need time and resources to find it. If we run now, we lose any chance of saving our home." The room erupted in argument again. Lee let them debate, knowing what must be done. Humanity had always survived by solving problems others thought impossible. When the final vote came, it was closer than he expected, but the decision was made. Earth would not run. 3 hours later, Admiral Lee stood before the cameras, broadcasting to every human colony and outpost. "While others retreat," he said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion, "humanity will stand and search for a solution. This is not just our fight. We stand for all those abandoned, human and alien alike. We stand for those who cannot run." Across human space, people watched in fear and pride. They would face the darkness together. The abandoned Arcturian research station hung in space like a ghost ship, its lights flickering on emergency power. Dr. Kim Mina floated through the empty corridors, pushing herself along in zero gravity. The aliens had left in such a hurry that food still sat on tables and personal items cluttered workstations. "They didn't even wipe their computers," Kim said into her comm unit as her team downloaded data from the main terminals. "It's like they valued speed over security." Back on Earth, in a secured underground facility beneath the Pacific Ocean, Kim and her team worked day and night sifting through the alien data. Most files were locked behind encryption, but the Arcturians' hasty departure had left security vulnerabilities. "Look at this," said Dr. Sue, pointing to a file they'd just cracked. Historical records of previous void encounters, dating back nearly 40,000 years. Kim leaned forward, eyes widening as she read. That's impossible. The Concorde told us they'd only encountered the void twice before. The team worked feverishly, breaking through more security layers. Each new discovery was more disturbing than the last. The void wasn't a natural disaster or cosmic anomaly, as the aliens had claimed. It was alive, a vast collective of energy-based life forms that traveled together, consuming the life force of organic creatures. They feed on consciousness itself, Kim whispered, reading the ancient texts, and they're drawn to concentrated populations of sentient life. In a secure data vault, they found records of civilizations wiped out completely by previous void incursions. The Pellarites, masters of biological engineering, the quantum dynasty whose mathematics had formed the basis for FTL travel. The Nine Worlds Federation, once the dominant power in the galactic arm. All gone, consumed by the void. Most shocking were the Concorde's response protocols, unchanged for millennia, systematic retreat from the void's path, abandonment of outlying territories and calculated sacrifice of populations deemed acceptable losses. After 3 weeks of virtually no sleep, Kim requested an emergency meeting with Admiral Lee. They met in his bunker, 200 meters beneath the Himalayan mountains. "You look like hell," Lee said as she entered, dark circles under her eyes. "Wait till you see what we found." Kim's hands shook slightly as she pulled up the files on his screen. For an hour, she walked him through their discoveries, watching his expression shift from concern to shock to cold anger. "They knew," Lee finally said. "They've always known what this thing is." Kim nodded. "The void approaches populated areas on a predictable cycle. Every 10,000 years, it's drawn to wherever sentient life is most concentrated in our galaxy. The Concorde races have survived by sacrificing outer colonies and less developed species." She pulled up a final document, minutes from a closed Concorde Council session held just days after her initial report. This is from their internal meeting. The 17 elder races voted unanimously to retreat and... She paused, her voice tight with emotion. To use human space as a buffer zone. They calculated the void would be satiated enough by consuming our worlds that they could safely regroup in the galactic south. Lee stared at the document, his face hardening. "We trusted them. We thought we were partners." "We were never partners," Kim said quietly. "In their eyes, we're the newcomers, the youngest members of their community, expendable." The Admiral stood and walked to a map of human space projected on the wall. Nearly 1 trillion human lives spread across hundreds of worlds, all now directly in the void's path. "How much time? Do we have?" 4 months, maybe less, but there's something else. Kim pulled up her latest simulations. "Now that we know what we're looking for, I've found weaknesses in the void's structure, points where it's vulnerable." "Can we hurt it?" Lee asked, hope flickering in his eyes. "Better," Kim replied, allowing herself a small smile for the first time in weeks. "I think we can kill it." The massive Octarian orbital platform drifted silently around the gas giant Epsilon 9. Once home to thousands of aliens, now it was filled with human engineers working around the clock. Similar scenes played out across 3 star systems as Admiral Lee's Operation Bulwark transformed abandoned alien structures into humanity's last line of defense. "Cut that section free and mount the array there," ordered Commander Pack, pointing to a curved section of the platform. Workers in spacesuits moved with practiced efficiency, welding defense systems onto alien architecture never designed for war. In the command center, Admiral Lee studied holographic projections of all 3 star systems. Red markers showed the void's projected path. Blue markers indicated the defensive positions taking shape. The plan was ambitious, perhaps impossible, but it was the only one they had. "How's the evacuation going?" Lee asked his logistics officer. "Better than expected. 60% of civilians from outer colonies have been relocated behind the defensive line." The officer hesitated. "The rest are volunteering to stay and help." Lee nodded, unsurprised. In the face of extinction, humanity's courage had proven remarkable. On the engineering deck, Choi Hyun wiped sweat from his forehead as he adjusted microscopic settings on what had once been an Arctarian atmospheric regulator. For 3 weeks he'd barely slept, testing theories about the void's structure based on Dr. Kim's research. The breakthrough had come by accident. While calibrating equipment, he generated an unusual electromagnetic frequency that caused recordings of the void to show distinct disruption patterns. It responded to the signal, he'd told his stunned team, which means it can be affected by our technology. Now the race was on to modify every weapon in Earth's arsenal. In shipyards across human space, vessels were being retrofitted with HFY's disruptor arrays, devices that broadcast the specific frequencies that seem to interfere with the void's cohesion. "Run the simulation again," Choi told his assistant as they tested a modified defense satellite. On the screen, the test pattern showed the disruption effect spreading through a section of simulated void matter. "How long will the effect last?" asked Captain Jun, watching from the doorway. Choi sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "Minutes at best. It's not a permanent solution, but it might buy us time to deploy Dr. Kim's quantum device." Reports from across human space told a story unlike any in history. Traditional rivalries between Earth nations were set aside. Colony worlds that had sought independence now sent resources back to the homeworld. Private companies converted production lines to build components for the defense effort. On Mars, children helped pack emergency supplies. At the Titan shipyards, retired engineers came back to work. On New Shanghai, farmers donated their harvests to feed those working on the defensive line. Perhaps most remarkable was the response from the aliens left behind. Thousands of non-humans, abandoned by their own species, volunteered to help the human effort. Their knowledge of alien technology proved invaluable in converting the megastructures for defense. "We thought we were alone in this fight," Lee told his officers during a rare, quiet moment. "We're not." In the officers' mess hall, a group of tired engineers watched news feeds from Earth. Millions of people were gathering in cities around the world, holding candles in a show of unity that spanned continents. "We should be scared," said Lieutenant Yong, watching the crowds. "But I don't feel scared anymore." "Because we're doing something," replied Choi, who had finally taken a break after working 30 hours straight. "Not running, not hiding. For the first time in history, we're all standing together." Outside the viewport, the modified defense platform gleamed in the light of the nearby gas giant. Soon the void would come, and humanity would face its greatest test. But they would face it together. The silence on the bridge of the battleship Dauntless was absolute. Commander Yoon Ji stood at the viewport, watching as the stars ahead of them began to vanish one by one. It wasn't like clouds covering stars, or ships passing in front. The stars simply ceased to exist, leaving perfect blackness behind. "That's it," whispered Lieutenant Park, the science officer. "The void." Through the main view screen they could see it clearly now, a vast, swirling darkness that seemed to eat light itself. Around its edges, matter glowed briefly before being consumed like paper burning from the edges inward. It moved with purpose, not like a natural phenomenon, but like a hunting predator. "All ships report ready, Commander," said Communications Officer Sun, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. Yoon nodded, her throat dry. 87 ships formed the first attack wing, humanity's vanguard against an enemy that had devoured entire civilizations. She thought of the thousands of crew members waiting for her command, of the billions of lives depending on them. "This is Commander Yoon to all ships," she said, her voice carried across the fleet. "We know what we face. We know the risks. Remember your training, remember why we fight." She paused, watching the darkness grow larger on the view screen. "Today we show the universe that humanity doesn't run." Attack formation, Delta. Weapons hot. Engage. The fleet moved as one, sleek warships accelerating toward the darkness. On the Dauntless, Weapons Officer Han was the first to fire, sending a focused beam of Choi's disruptor energy directly into the void. Across the fleet, identical. Weapons fired in sequence, creating a web of energy that struck the darkness. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, like ripples in water, patterns of disruption spread through the void's leading edge. The darkness seemed to recoil, its advance momentarily halted. "It's working!" shouted Han, staring at his readings in disbelief. Cheers erupted across the bridge. echoed throughout the fleet as targeting data showed the void's expansion had stopped. For the first time in recorded history, the cosmic horror had been forced to pause. "Press the advantage," ordered Yoon. "All ships, increase disruptor output to maximum." The fleet surged forward, pouring more energy into the wounded section of darkness. For a precious moment, Yoon allowed herself to hope. Perhaps it could be this simple. Perhaps humanity had found the answer that had eluded the elder races for millennia. Then the darkness changed. The disruption patterns began to smooth out, the ripples fading. At the edges of the affected area, the blackness seemed to thicken, becoming more dense, more solid. "Commander," called Park urgently, "it's adapting to our frequency." Before Yoon could order a retreat, the void surged forward with terrifying speed. Ships at the front of the formation simply vanished, consumed in an instant. Others were torn apart as the darkness passed through them. "Evasive maneuvers," Yoon shouted. "All ships fall back to defensive line 2. The Dauntless shuddered as something struck its port side. Emergency lights flashed as damage reports flooded in. Across the fleet, similar scenes played out as the surviving ships fought to escape the advancing darkness. 29 ships never made it, a third of the attack wing gone in moments. As the Dauntless limped toward the second defensive line, Yoon recorded her report for Earth Command. Her arm was bandaged where a console explosion had burned her, and her voice was hoarse from shouting orders. "The void has reached the outermost defensive line," she said into the recorder. "Initial engagement showed promising results. Our disruptor technology temporarily halted its advance." She paused, looking at the casualty reports on her screen. "We've suffered heavy losses. The entity appears capable of adapting to our attack methods. But there's something else." Her eyes gleamed with fierce determination. "We hurt it. For the first time in history, something hurt it. The void can be wounded, and what can be wounded can be killed." As the survivors regrouped, the data from their brief victory was already being transmitted back to Earth, where Dr. Kim and her team would use it to refine their weapons. They had lost the first battle, but in that loss had found the first real hope that the war might be won. Dr. Kim hadn't slept in 3 days. Her office walls were covered with equations and diagrams, the floor littered with empty coffee cups. When the battle data from Commander Yoon's engagement arrived, Kim and her team fell on it like starving people on food. "Look at these readings," she said, pointing to energy fluctuations recorded during the brief moment when the disruptors had affected the void. "The pattern doesn't make sense in three-dimensional space." Her colleague Dr. Nam frowned at the holographic display. "What are you thinking?" Kim manipulated the display, rotating the data model and overlaying quantum field equations. "I've seen something like this before, in theoretical papers on dimensional phasing. What if the void isn't fully in our universe? What if it exists partially in another dimension and only extends into our space to feed?" The team worked frantically, testing her theory against historical data and the fresh battle recordings. Each test strengthened the hypothesis. By dawn, Kim was convinced. "It's like a creature that lives in deep water but reaches a tentacle up to the surface," she explained to Admiral Lee over a secure channel. "We've been attacking the tentacle, but the body remains safe in its own dimension." "Can we reach it there?" Lee asked. Kim's eyes gleamed with exhaustion and excitement. "Better. We can seal the breach it uses to enter our dimension. Cut it off. Completely." Within hours, Kim stood before the Earth Crisis Committee, explaining her theory to the assembled leaders. The chamber was silent as she laid out her plan. "We need to build a quantum resonance device," she said, pointing to the schematics projected behind her. "When activated, it will generate a field that forces all matter to vibrate at frequencies compatible only with our dimension. Anything existing partially in another dimension will be forced to fully commit to one or the other." "And the void would choose its home dimension," said the defense minister, understanding dawning. "Exactly. But building this device—" Kim hesitated. "We don't have the technology. The Medusans did, though. Their phase transition engines operated on similar principles." "The Medusans left," reminded the science director. "They took their technology with them." "Not all of it," Kim countered. "Their research station in the Tau Ceti system was too large to evacuate quickly. Our intelligence suggests they left significant equipment behind. What she didn't mention was that Tau Ceti was directly in the void's path. The station would already be under assault. When the call went out for volunteers to retrieve the Medusan technology, Captain Kang Su was the first to step forward. Known for his calm under pressure, the veteran soldier assembled a team of 12, engineers, scientists, and special forces operators. "This isn't a standard mission," he told them in the hangar bay as they prepared to board. "We're going straight into the mouth of the beast. I can't guarantee we'll all come back." No one withdrew. They understood the stakes. The journey to Tau Ceti took 18 hours in emergency FTL. When they dropped back to normal space, the view was terrifying. The station still orbited the star, but the void had already engulfed its outer sections. From the remaining habitable zone, emergency beacons flashed, survivors left behind in the Medusan evacuation. "We have two objectives," Kang told his team, as they approached. "Retrieve the phase transition engines and evacuate any survivors." The docking was rough, the station's systems already failing. Inside, they found darkness broken only by emergency lighting. The air tasted wrong, as if reality itself was thinning. "Life signs ahead," reported Lieutenant Song, checking her scanner. "Non-human signatures. They found 7 Medusans trapped in a sealed laboratory. The aliens' tentacled bodies quivered with fear, but they understood the humans' purpose immediately. The engines," their translator spoke. "We were protecting them this way." With the Medusans' help, Kang's team located the phase transition engines, 5 cylindrical devices each the size of a small car. As they worked to disconnect them, the station shuddered. "The void is accelerating its consumption," warned one. "Medusan, we have minutes, not hours." The race back to the ship was a nightmare. Sections of corridor simply disappeared as the void broke through internal barriers. 2 engineers and a soldier vanished when a bulkhead behind them ceased to exist. Another 3 died protecting the rear, as strange energy tendrils reached for the engines. When the ship finally broke free of the station, only 6 humans and 4 Medusans remained alive. In the cargo hold, secured with everything they could, sat the 5-phase transition engines, humanity's last hope. "Mission accomplished," Kang reported to Earth, his voice hollow as he looked at the empty seats around him. "We have what we need. But the cost—" He closed his eyes briefly. It was high. The massive quantum resonance device filled the hangar of Earth's largest space station. A marvel of human ingenuity and alien technology, it stood 20 meters tall, its surface covered with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. Engineers and scientists moved around it like priests attending a temple, making final adjustments as the deadline approached. Dr. Kim stood before the main control panel, checking readings for the 100th time. Dark circles under her eyes testified to weeks of sleepless nights. The Medusan phase transition engines had been successfully integrated into the human-designed framework, creating something entirely new, a weapon against the impossible. "Final diagnostics complete," reported Engineer Choi, his voice showing the same exhaustion they all felt. "The device is ready." Kim nodded, but her expression remained grave. Ready, but useless without power. That was the problem they'd been wrestling with for days. The quantum resonance device was complete, but its power requirements were beyond anything humanity had ever needed before. Standard reactors, even antimatter engines, couldn't generate enough energy to create the dimensional seal they needed. "We need the emergency council meeting now," Kim told Admiral Lee. "The void will reach our final defensive line in less than 72 hours. An hour later, Kim stood in the center of the emergency council chamber. Representatives from every human world attended, either in person or via hologram. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone knew they were running out of time. "The quantum device is operational," Kim began, her voice steady despite her fatigue. "Once activated, it will force the void to fully commit to either our dimension or its own. Our tests indicate it will choose its home dimension, effectively sealing it away from our universe." Murmurs of hope spread through the room until the science director asked, "What about power requirements? Last report said we were still short by several orders of magnitude." Kim took a deep breath. We've exhausted all conventional options. There's only one power source capable of generating enough energy. She tapped her tablet, and an image of the sun appeared over the center of the room. We need to temporarily destabilize Earth's sun. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. The president of the African Union stood up. Destabilize the sun? You're talking about risking our home star. I understand the implications, Kim replied, her voice tight. My team has developed a method to create a controlled solar flare that would direct energy to the quantum device. The sun would experience significant disruption but should restabilize within 72 hours. Should? Demanded the European Chancellor. What's the worst-case scenario? Kim looked him directly in the eyes. If miscalculated, our sun could go nova. Earth and the inner planets would be destroyed. Silence fell over the room. The representatives looked at each other, the weight of the decision crushing down on them. And our alternatives? Asked Admiral Lee quietly. Conventional evacuation can save approximately 40% of Earth's population, replied the logistics officer. The void will consume the rest, then continue. Through human space, total extinction would follow within months. For hours, the debate raged. Scientists questioned Kim's calculations. Military leaders proposed last-ditch conventional attacks. Religious leaders spoke of faith and courage in the face of annihilation. As the argument continued, an elderly janitor, who had been quietly cleaning the chamber, approached the center of the room. The chamber fell silent as he cleared his throat. I have 16 grandchildren, he said simply. Some here, some on Mars, some on the outer colonies. I'd rather risk dying trying to save them all than live knowing we abandoned half to save the rest. His words hung in the air, cutting through the technical and political arguments. One by one, the representatives looked at each other, then back at Dr. Kim. The final vote was closer than anyone expected, but in the end, the decision was made. Earth would risk its own destruction to save humanity. Solar stations already orbiting. The sun would be converted to generate the controlled destabilization. The quantum device would be positioned at the precise coordinates where its field would intersect with the approaching void. They would risk everything on one desperate gamble, a sacrifice play with a planet's life at stake. The fleet gathered. At the edge of the solar system, every ship humanity could muster. From massive battleships to hastily armed civilian transports, they formed Earth's last line of defense. Commander Yoon stood on the bridge of the Dauntless, now patched together after the first engagement. Attack Pattern Omega, she ordered. Remember, we just need to hold its attention. Buy time for the device to be positioned. The void had grown since their first encounter. It stretched across space like a living darkness, consuming everything it touched. The outer planets were already disappearing into its maw. Pluto gone, Neptune fading. Looking at long-range scans, Yoon could see tendrils of nothingness reaching toward the inner solar system, toward Earth. For home, she whispered, as the fleet accelerated toward the darkness. Meanwhile, the quantum device was being moved into final position, a precise point between Earth and the approaching void. The massive construction was surrounded by escort ships, engineers making final adjustments to its delicate mechanisms. Dr. Kim watched from the command ship, her heart pounding as solar stations around the sun began the destabilization sequence. Red warning lights flashed across her console. Energy buildup at 30%, reported a technician, his voice tight with tension. Solar disruption beginning. Across Earth, people looked up to see their sun beginning to change. Flares larger than anything in recorded history burst from its surface. The sky took on an eerie reddish glow. In the dark of night, auroras appeared even at the equator, shimmering curtains of light dancing as Earth's magnetic field responded to the solar disturbance. Temperature readings began to drop as the sun's output fluctuated, 6 degrees in the first 12 hours, then 10. Across the planet, people huddled together in shelters watching news feeds that showed the battle unfolding in space. The human fleet fought with desperate courage. Weapons that had once merely slowed the void now carved visible wounds in its darkness. But for every section that recoiled from attack, 2 more surged forward. Ships winked out of existence as they were consumed, their sacrifice buying precious minutes. Solar energy capture at 70%, came the update. 90%, maximum capacity reached. a beam of concentrated solar energy, the combined power of a destabilized star, shot toward the quantum device. The massive construction began to hum, patterns on its surface glowing with increasing brightness. Activation in 3, 2, 1. The device erupted with blinding light, generating a quantum field that expanded outward at impossible speed. Where it met the void, a barrier formed, reality itself hardening against the interdimensional intruder. For the first time, the void's advance halted completely. Its darkness pressed against the barrier, testing, probing for weaknesses. Waves of energy rippled across the quantum field as the two forces battled. On Earth, the temperature continued to drop. Rivers froze. Snow fell in deserts. The sun flickered like a dying candle, its energy being channeled away to maintain the barrier. Hour by hour, humanity watched and waited. Would the sun stabilize as predicted? Would the barrier hold? Children asked questions their parents couldn't answer. Scientists monitored readings that fluctuated wildly. Religious leaders prayed in buildings that grew colder by the hour. In the command center beneath the Himalayas, Admiral Lee and Dr. Kim watched the data streams, barely speaking. After 48 hours without sleep, both were running on nothing but determination. A massive surge against the barrier made the sensors scream in warning. The void was concentrating its assault, throwing everything against one section of the quantum field. "It's learning," Kim whispered. "It's trying to break through." Lee looked at the temperature readings from Earth's surface, 30 degrees below normal and dropping. How much longer could their world survive like this? How much longer could the sun endure the destabilization? As if reading his thoughts, Kim's hand found his on the console. Their eyes met in the dim emergency lighting. "Whatever happens," Lee said quietly, "we didn't run." The 72nd hour approached. On Earth, temperatures had fallen dangerously low. Shelters were running out of heating fuel. The sky had taken on an unnatural purple hue as the sun's disruption reached critical levels. In the command center, Dr. Kim stared at the readings with bloodshot eyes. The quantum barrier had held against the void's increasingly desperate attacks, but the strain on both the device and Earth's sun was reaching breaking point. "We're approaching the threshold," she said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "The sun can't take much more of this destabilization." Admiral Lee nodded grimly. "And the void?" Still hammering at the barrier, but Kim frowned at a new reading that appeared on her screen. "Wait, something's happening." The quantum field had begun to pulse, its energy signature changing in ways they hadn't predicted. At the barrier's edge, the void's darkness was no longer pressing forward, but appeared to be retreating. "It's working," shouted one of the scientists. "The dimensional frequencies are forcing it to choose." On screens across the command center, they watched as the impossible happened. The void wasn't simply stopping, it was collapsing in on itself. The quantum resonance had created a feedback loop, forcing the interdimensional entity completely back into its home dimension. Where the darkness had been, stars reappeared. "The rift," Kim whispered in disbelief. "It's closing." Within minutes, long-range sensors confirmed what they were seeing. The void wasn't just retreating, it was disappearing entirely, the dimensional breach sealing behind it. The quantum device had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. "Shut down the solar interface," ordered Lee immediately. "Get our sun stabilized." As the solar stations ceased their disruption, Earth's sun gradually returned to normal. Across the planet, people emerged from shelters to see the familiar yellow light returning to the sky. The temperature began to rise. Rivers thawed. Green returned to forests that had been covered in frost. Humanity had survived. More than that, they had won. 2 weeks later, the first Concorde ships appeared at the edge of the solar system. The massive vessels approached cautiously, their sensors scanning for debris. The aliens had returned, expecting to find a dead system, consumed by the void, a tragic but necessary sacrifice in their ancient pattern of retreat and survival. Instead, they found Earth intact. They found a human fleet, damaged but victorious. And they found no trace of the void that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. In the grand reception hall of United Earth headquarters, Admiral Lee stood with Dr. Kim and the other heroes of humanity's stand. Across from them, representatives of the 17 elder races gathered, their expressions showing emotions ranging from shock to shame to grudging respect. Ambassador Park Jin approached first, performing a formal bow in the ancient Earth tradition. "We came to pay our respects to your memory," he said, his voice subdued. "We believed this system would be gone, consumed like all the others before it." "You ran," said Lee simply, not hiding the accusation in his voice. "You left us to die." "Yes," admitted the ambassador, surprising everyone with his candor. "For thousands of years we believed survival justified abandonment. We calculated acceptable losses. We sacrificed the few to save the many." A Zetrian representative stepped forward, its crystalline body glowing faintly. "In 10,000 years, no species ever stood against the void. No one even tried to fight it. We had no choice," said Dr. Kim. "This is our home." The alien delegates exchanged uncomfortable glances. The Arctarian spoke next, its voice translated through a small device. "You did what we thought impossible. You've shown us a better way." In the months that followed, the Galactic Concord underwent its most significant reorganization in 50,000 years. The old hierarchy, based on age and historical precedent, was replaced by a new system that valued innovation and courage. Humanity, once the newcomers, found themselves in a leadership position. As the new Concord Charter was signed, a small memorial was unveiled in the council chamber, a monument to those who had fallen fighting the void, both human and alien. At its base, simple words were inscribed in every language of the galaxy. "We stand together. We fight together. We survive together." A new galactic era had begun.